I still remember the day it all changed. I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. My heart sank before I even looked at the screen. It was him, my son, my own boy, and he didn't call me Dad anymore. He hadn't for months. Now, just his name flashed on the screen, plain and cold. No, hey Dad. No, can we talk? Just his name. And something in me, some quiet, fragile part of my heart, broke. I made the call anyway. My voice was steady, though inside I felt hollow. Hello. Hi, he said. Just that. And I could hear the hesitation in his tone, the unspoken words. I wanted to ask him why, what had changed, why he stopped calling me the one name I had held on to for his entire life. But I didn't. I just listened. I've always thought of myself as a good father. I worked long hours to provide for him, stayed up late helping with homework, and tried to teach him things that mattered, not just math or science, but how to treat people with kindness, how to keep your word, how to handle disappointment without losing your dignity. I thought love alone could shield a boy from the mistakes of a father. I was wrong. Before all of this, life felt ordinary. I had a house in a quiet neighborhood, a small backyard with a swing set I built myself, and a kitchen table where we shared meals and talked about our day. My wife, Sarah, was always there with a smile that made even Monday mornings feel warm. Our son, Ryan, had messy hair, a crooked grin, and a laugh that could fill a room. Those were the days I could lose myself in. Days when nothing hurt, and everything felt simple. I remember one evening when Ryan was about 8. I was fixing the leaky faucet in the kitchen, and he sat on the counter, legs swinging, asking questions about how the pipes worked. I tried to answer, but he didn't just want answers. He wanted me to listen, and I did. I remember thinking, in that quiet moment, that life could stay like this forever, that a father and son could always have this. But life doesn't wait. Quiet moments give way to misunderstandings, small resentments, and unspoken words. I didn't see it coming, not even when the first cracks appeared. It started with small things. Ryan wouldn't sit with me at breakfast. He stopped asking about my day. He would answer me with one-word replies, and sometimes he would walk away mid-conversation. I thought he was just growing up, finding his independence. I didn't realize that independence was slowly turning into distance. The first time he refused to call me Dad, it felt like a punch to the chest. He was 12. We were in the living room, watching an old movie together. I tried to make a joke about something in the film. He didn't laugh. I reached out to ruffle his hair, like I always did. He moved away. Stop, man. I'm not a kid, he said, cold and sharp. And that was it. No, Dad. No, come on. Just a boundary I hadn't seen coming. I didn't yell. I didn't chase him. I just sat there, stunned, feeling a part of myself vanish. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every word, every action, asking myself what I had done wrong. But I couldn't find a clear answer. I had provided, I had loved, I had been there. What more could a father do? Over the next few months, our conversations became shorter, colder. My wife noticed. She tried to help. She suggested we spend more time together, take trips, do things Ryan loved. I agreed, but every attempt felt like walking on ice. I never knew when he would retreat, when the bridge would collapse under my feet. And then the call came, months later. Just his name on the screen. No greeting, no title. Just Ryan. I didn't know then what he needed. I only knew that the silence between us had grown too heavy to ignore. And I was ready, finally, to hear him, even if it hurt. I want to take you back to the early days, before the silence settled between us. Back when Ryan still called me Dad, and life felt simple, almost predictable. Our mornings were quiet rituals. I would wake up before the sun, make a cup of black coffee, and watch the steam curl above the mug. Sarah would still be in the bedroom, her hair messy from sleep, and Ryan would shuffle into the kitchen in pajamas 2 sizes too big, rubbing his eyes. I remember the sound of his footsteps, light and uneven, like he was walking on tiptoe through the world, careful not to disturb it too much. Breakfast was always a small ceremony. I'd pour cereal into a bowl for Ryan, sometimes let him add an extra scoop of sugar because he loved it that way. Sarah made toast, butter melting over it, and the smell of coffee and morning bread would fill the kitchen. I'd sit across from them, sipping slowly, listening to Ryan talk about school, his little victories, or just nonsense that made me laugh. Those mornings were mine. They belonged to me. I remember one day, Ryan was excited about a science project. He had built a small volcano out of paper mache, and he kept waving it at me, almost dropping it on the floor in his excitement. "Look, Dad. It erupts," he said, eyes wide. I leaned in, trying not to spill my coffee, and said, "Careful, champ. Don't let it blow up before the demonstration." We laughed, and I realized how precious those moments were. Small and insignificant in the grand scheme of life, but they were everything to me. Evenings were different, but equally comforting. After work, I'd come home tired, but I'd always take a few minutes to see Ryan before the house settled into its quiet rhythm. Sometimes he'd be on the couch, nose buried in a book, other times sprawled on the floor, building something with Legos or drawing in his notebook. "Dad, look at this," he'd say, holding up a crude drawing of our family. His stick figures were awkward, but I could see his effort. I smiled, really smiled, and said, "This is amazing, Ryan. You captured us perfectly." I'd see the pride in his eyes, and I knew he craved that approval, craved the simple acknowledgement that a father gives. And I gave it. Always. Because it mattered. On weekends, we had a routine too. Saturday mornings meant pancakes, syrup dripping down the sides, and Ryan flipping through comic books while I cooked. Sometimes we would go to the park, him riding his bike while I jogged beside him, pretending to keep up. He was always faster than me, always just out of reach, but I didn't mind. I liked running behind him, watching him grow, watching him find his balance on two wheels. Sometimes, just sometimes, I'd catch a glimpse of the future in his eyes. I'd see the young man he would become, strong and independent, and a pang of fear would hit me. Fear that I wasn't doing enough, that time would slip by, and I'd wake up one day to realize I had missed my chance to guide him. But I always pushed that fear aside and focused on the present. Sarah was the glue that held us together. She worked a flexible job from home and always had time to nurture Ryan's interests, attend his school events, and maintain the warmth of our home. She noticed the small details, the way Ryan's socks never matched, the way he left half-eaten breakfast on the table, the way he'd fall asleep reading. She reminded me to slow down, to appreciate these fleeting years. I was the provider, she was the nurturer, and Ryan was the spark that lit the entire house. That was the balance we had, the rhythm that made life feel full and safe. I still remember one Sunday evening, the kind where the air smells faintly of rain and the sky is painted with soft oranges and pinks. We were all sitting in the living room, feet tucked under cushions, talking about nothing in particular. Ryan asked me why the stars came out at night, and I tried to explain, using the simplest words I could find. "But why, Dad? Why don't they shine during the day?" he asked, genuinely curious. I smiled, resting my chin on my hand, and said, "Because the sun is too bright. The stars wait their turn. Sometimes, the brightest things need a little darkness to be seen." Ryan nodded, thoughtful, and I saw him holding on to that small piece of wisdom without fully understanding it yet. That was the beauty of it, the little lessons you plant, hoping they take root. Even though I worked long hours, I always made sure to carve out time for him. Sometimes it was homework, sometimes it was fixing a bike, sometimes it was simply sitting together, letting the silence speak between us. I thought that was enough. I thought that presence, even quiet, even imperfect, would anchor our bond. We celebrated birthdays with candles and laughter, Christmases with trembling excitement as Ryan tore through paper, discovering toys and books and trinkets we had chosen for him. I tried to be present for every milestone, from school recitals to soccer games. I wanted him to know that I saw him, that I cared, that no matter how far he grew, I would always be there. Even in the midst of these happy routines, life had its quiet tensions. Little things began to slip through the cracks, unnoticed at first. Ryan would sometimes frown while reading, or shrug when I asked him about school. At first, I thought it was just typical growing-up behavior. He was 12, after all, a boy on the edge of adolescence, learning to define himself outside of the family. But there were nights I felt a strange emptiness. I'd come home after a long day at work, expecting to be greeted with his excited chatter, and he'd barely look up from his video game. "Hey, Dad," he'd mutter, in a tone that sounded distant, almost rehearsed. I wanted to ask what was wrong, but I hesitated. I didn't want to push him away by insisting on affection, so I stayed quiet, pretending everything was fine, even though I felt that subtle ache in my chest that I didn't yet know how to name. Sometimes I would overhear him talking to friends on the phone, laughing at jokes I didn't understand, speaking in a voice that seemed older than his years. And though I was glad he had friends, part of me felt like he was slipping away in little pieces, not with anger, not with words, but with silence. Sarah noticed too. One evening, she approached me after dinner, folding her hands over the edge of the kitchen counter. "Have you noticed Ryan's been distant?" she asked quietly. Her voice was soft, but steady. "I thought it was normal," I admitted, stirring my tea slowly. "He's growing up, figuring things out." She shook her head gently. "Maybe, but he's more than just growing up. He's withdrawing. You need to talk to him, not just be there physically. Listen, really listen." I nodded. I promised myself I would. And I tried. I did. But listening is harder than it sounds when a child shields himself behind half smiles, clipped words, and deflected conversations. One afternoon, I came home early from work, thinking I could surprise him. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the washing machine. I found him in his room, headphones on, staring at his computer screen. "Hey, champ," I said softly, stepping inside. "Got a minute?" He didn't remove his headphones. "I'm busy," he muttered. "Busy with what?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "Nothing," he said, barely looking up. I stayed there for a while, not wanting to leave, but also not wanting to force him. Finally, I said, "All right, I'll be around if you need me." And just like that, I walked out, feeling that familiar weight in my chest. That was the first time I realized that love sometimes isn't enough. That presence isn't always presence. Despite these small moments of distance, there were still times when Ryan would let his guard down. I remember one rainy evening, the kind where water streaks the windows in long, trembling lines, and the world outside seems muted. I found him sitting on the couch, sketchbook in hand, doodling quietly. I sat beside him, careful not to interrupt, watching the pencil move across the page. "Do you want me to see?" I asked gently. He hesitated, then nodded. The drawing was of our house, the backyard, the swing set. The figures were stick-thin, imperfect, but unmistakably him and me and Sarah. I pointed to the figure labeled Dad and smiled. "This is great, Ryan," I said. "You captured everything perfectly." He smiled faintly, and for a moment, the distance melted. We sat together, watching the rain, letting the silence speak between us, comfortable in its presence. Those were the moments I clung to, the reminders that, even in growing distance, the bond was still there, fragile but unbroken. Even so, cracks were forming in subtle ways. He started questioning things I said, challenging rules I set, and sometimes dismissing my opinions outright. "Dad, you don't get it," he said one evening, slamming his homework shut. "You work all day, and you never even ask how I'm doing. You just expect me to tell you if something's wrong." I felt the sting in my chest, the weight of failure pressing down. I wanted to explain, to tell him that I cared, that I was always worried about him, that my long hours were meant to provide for him. But words felt empty, and so I said nothing. I simply nodded. "I'll try to be better," I said finally, though my voice sounded hollow even to me. Ryan shrugged and walked to his room, leaving me alone at the kitchen table, staring at the half-empty cup of coffee I hadn't touched. That was the first real hint that my son's heart was pulling away. Not with anger, not with shouting, but with quiet hurt, the kind that seeps into the bones without warning. School events became another battleground of emotion. I wanted to attend everything, his soccer games, his school plays, his awards ceremonies. But work would often intervene, leaving me frustrated and apologetic. I could see the disappointment in his eyes, fleeting but sharp. "Dad, it's okay. I know you're busy," he'd say, forcing a smile. But I knew him too well. That forced smile was a silent accusation, a reminder of the moments I had missed, the times I chose work over presence. Evenings after these events were often quiet, a lingering tension between us that neither of us knew how to break. I'd sit at the edge of his bed while he drifted to sleep, reading the same bedtime stories he had grown tired of months ago. And though he would pretend to sleep, I could hear his soft breathing, the subtle rhythm that reminded me of his presence, still there, still fragile. On weekends, I tried harder. I planned small trips, outings, and dinners, hoping to reclaim the connection slipping through my fingers. We'd go to the park, ride bikes, or just walk through the neighborhood, sharing quiet conversations. Sometimes, we laughed together, the kind of laughter that feels full, that makes your chest ache in the best way. And yet, There were times when Ryan would pull back, arms crossed, expression tight. "Do you really get me, Dad?" he asked once, his voice low, almost a whisper. I wanted to answer. I wanted to tell him I did, that I had always tried to, that I would always try. But I knew that words alone weren't enough. I just nodded, hoping he would understand in silence what I could not say in speech. The first time I truly felt the weight of it, I remember standing in the kitchen late at night, the house empty except for the ticking of the clock and the hum of the refrigerator. I was staring at the half-empty coffee cup from earlier, wondering where it all went wrong. Ryan had slammed his bedroom door after a short, tense conversation. Nothing dramatic, no yelling, just words left hanging in the air, sharp and brittle. "You don't understand me, Dad," he had said. Simple words, yet they cut deeper than I could have imagined. I thought back to all the mornings I'd watched him shuffle into the kitchen, all the evenings we'd spent together, and it felt like it had been erased. One statement, a simple accusation, and suddenly I was left questioning everything. Was I really failing him? Was all the love, all the effort, not enough? Days passed with the tension lingering like a shadow over the house. Ryan became more withdrawn, less willing to share. His laughter, once so infectious, grew rare, punctuated by long silences and distracted glances. I tried to reach out, sometimes through notes slipped under his door, sometimes through small gestures, a favorite snack left on his desk, a funny text meant to make him smile. But the responses were minimal, distant. I remember sitting beside him one evening while he did homework. "Need any help?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "No, I've got it," he muttered, eyes fixed on the textbook. "All right," I said, forcing a calm tone. But inside, my chest ached. I wanted to say more, to tell him that I cared, that I was here. But words were failing me, slipping out like sand through my fingers. Sometimes, our interactions weren't just quiet, they were tense. I'd try to start a conversation, asking about his friends or school projects, and he'd respond sharply, almost defensively. "Dad, can you not?" he snapped once when I asked about a science project he was struggling with. His voice startled me, more for its intensity than its anger. It wasn't malicious, I could tell. It was frustration, misdirected and loud in the only way he knew how to express it. I stayed silent after that, letting him finish in peace. Later, when the room had quieted and I thought he was asleep, I sat alone in the living room, thinking about the slow unraveling of what we once had. I felt powerless. I didn't know how to reach him anymore. And then came the small betrayals, the moments that hurt not because of malice, but because they signaled a shift I hadn't yet fully grasped. Ryan started staying out later, texting me vague answers when I asked where he had been. The truth, I could sense, was hidden behind a wall I couldn't climb. One night, Sarah came to me after dinner, her eyes tired. "He's slipping away," she said softly, almost a whisper. "You have to do something before it's too late." "I am doing something," I replied, frustrated. "I'm here. I'm always here." "Being here isn't enough," she said. "You have to connect. Really connect. Before it becomes too late." Her words lingered in my mind, echoing long after she went to bed. I wanted to connect. I wanted to reach him. But how do you reach someone who is slowly building walls around his heart? Then came the first real confrontation, though even that was quiet, almost painfully gentle in its intensity. One afternoon, I found Ryan in the living room, headphones on, staring at his laptop screen. I tried to sit beside him, but he recoiled slightly, the air between us taut. "Dad," he began, hesitating. "Yes," I said, soft, careful. I don't want to do this with you right now," he said. His voice cracked slightly, betraying the frustration he tried to hide. "I'm not forcing you," I whispered. I want to understand. That's all." He shook his head, eyes avoiding mine, and went back to the screen. I sat there, letting the silence stretch between us, a silence that felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. It wasn't anger he was expressing, it was disappointment, confusion, a growing distance I didn't know how to bridge. At work, my mind drifted constantly to home. I replayed our interactions over and over, dissecting every word, every pause, every sigh. I wanted to see where I had gone wrong, what I had missed. But no matter how much I tried, the answers eluded me. The turning point of the rising tension, though subtle at first, came during a weekend when I planned a small outing, a simple trip to the park. I imagined laughter, conversation, small victories in rebuilding our bond. I pictured Ryan riding his bike while I jogged behind him, the wind in our faces, smiles on our lips. But he refused to come. "I'm staying home," he said, voice flat, eyes not meeting mine. "Why?" I asked, hiding the disappointment in my tone. I don't feel like it," he muttered. I nodded slowly, forcing a smile. "All right, maybe next time." But inside, I felt a quiet despair settling over me. That day, the living room felt colder, emptier. The small rituals, the laughter, the connection, it all seemed fragile, like glass teetering on the edge of a counter. I realized then that the distance wasn't temporary. It was growing, almost invisible at first, but relentless. The quiet tension between us began to affect every corner of the house. Even simple routines carried an undercurrent of unease. Mornings were shorter, filled with clipped responses. Evenings were quieter, the laughter and chatter replaced by the hum of electronics and the faint sound of Ryan's typing or scrolling. I tried to keep my patience. I reminded myself that he was growing up, that this was part of adolescence. But each rebuff, each dismissive glance, each word left unsaid, chipped away at something inside me. One Friday evening, I decided to invite him to a small father-son dinner I'd prepared. The table was set neatly, the aroma of roasted chicken and fresh vegetables filling the dining room. I waited for him, hoping he would notice the effort, hoping he would come. "I don't want to eat right now," he said from his room, voice flat. I walked to his door. "Ryan, I made dinner. It'd be nice if you joined me." "No thanks, Dad," he said, avoiding my gaze. I swallowed, trying not to let the hurt show. "All right, but the offer's open if you change your mind." He didn't answer, and I returned to the table, sitting alone, listening to the faint clatter of dishes from the kitchen. The silence was heavy, almost suffocating. That night, I couldn't sleep. I found myself pacing the house, trying to make sense of the gradual distance, replaying moments in my mind. I thought of the mornings when he had jumped into my arms, the evenings when he had leaned on my shoulder, the laughter we had shared. And I wondered, what had changed so suddenly? In the following weeks, I tried more subtle approaches. Small gestures of connection, little acts meant to show love without forcing interaction. I left notes under his pillow. "Hope you had a good day. I'm proud of you. I'm here if you need to talk." Most times, they went unanswered. One Saturday, I brought home a new video game I thought we could play together. "Hey, I thought we could try this tonight," I said, holding the box out. "I'm not in the mood," he replied, barely looking up. I placed it on the coffee table and sat beside him anyway, hoping proximity would be enough. He didn't move. The room felt suffocating, the glow of the TV screen casting shadows across his face. "Dad," he muttered finally. "Yes," I said. I need space, okay?" I nodded slowly, forcing a calm smile. "I understand. Take all the space you need." But inside, I felt the weight of helplessness pressing down. Space. That one word carried so much. It wasn't rejection, not fully, but it was the slow, quiet construction of walls I couldn't scale. Even at school events, the distance followed us. Parent-teacher nights became exercises in silent observation. I would stand at the edge of the classroom, watching him answer questions, participate in discussions, while my heart ached to see how distant he had become. I tried to cheer quietly, offer a nod of encouragement, a whispered, "good job," but even those small gestures sometimes drew only a quick glance or a shrug. The tipping point came one evening when I tried to have a heart-to-heart conversation. I had cleared my schedule, prepared myself to listen without judgment, and invited him to sit with me on the back porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet, the air cool and still. "Ryan," I began, "can we talk? I just want to understand." He stared at the horizon, his face tight. "About what?" he said, almost defiantly. "About us," I said, voice low, steady. "About why things feel different." He didn't answer at first. Then finally, "You don't get me, Dad. You never do. You just want to fix things, like everything's a problem to solve." I felt the sting of truth in his words. I had always tried to provide solutions, to offer advice, to guide him, believing that my experience could help him avoid mistakes. But I realized, in that moment, that he didn't want solutions. He wanted to be seen, understood, accepted, flaws and all. "I'm sorry," I said, my throat tight. I just want to help. But I see now that I've been trying the wrong way." He looked at me then, a flicker of emotion in his eyes, but the wall was still there. I just need you to listen sometimes. Not fix. Just listen. I nodded. I can do that. I will do that. It was a small breakthrough, fragile and hesitant. But even as I hoped for reconciliation, I could see the distance wasn't erased, only acknowledged. The conflict had escalated, subtly, quietly, but unmistakably. The tension between Ryan and me had grown so subtle, yet so heavy, that it was everywhere. In the way he avoided eye contact, in the way he lingered at the edge of rooms, in the sound of doors closing softly behind him. Even Sarah noticed. She would glance at me across the kitchen table, her eyes silently asking, "How do we fix this?" I didn't have an answer. I only had effort, patience, and love, none of which seemed to be enough. One afternoon, I walked past his room and heard him talking on the phone in a voice I barely recognized. There was frustration there, a hardness I hadn't heard before. He laughed, but it was forced, sharp, and distant. I didn't want to intrude, so I lingered in the hallway, silently listening. I felt a pang of helplessness, a quiet panic creeping through me. I realized then that he was sharing things with everyone but me, his thoughts, his frustrations, his laughter. I was outside of his world, an observer, no longer a participant. That evening, I tried again. I came home early from work, hoping to catch a moment alone with him. I found him on the couch, headphones on, a game controller in his hands. I sat beside him, careful not to touch the controller, careful not to invade his space. "Hey," I said softly. He didn't respond. "Ryan," I tried again gently. "I said I'm busy, Dad," he said, the words clipped, almost sharp. I nodded, forcing a calm smile. "I get it. I just wanted to be here, that's all." He gave a small shrug, barely acknowledging me. I felt a tight knot form in my chest. That shrug carried more weight than any argument we'd ever had. It said, "I don't need you right now. I don't want you. You're not part of my world." The following weeks only deepened the divide. He became secretive, locking his bedroom door, avoiding conversations, retreating further into his own world. I tried leaving small notes, reminders that I cared, but many went unread. The messages were never hostile, never mean-spirited, but the lack of acknowledgement cut deeper than any shout could have. Then came the first real betrayal, subtle, quiet, but undeniable. I had been saving for months to buy him a gift, something he had mentioned wanting, a high-end set of drawing pencils and sketch pads, tools for the one thing he truly loved, art. I had imagined his face lighting up when he opened it, imagined the rare moment of genuine connection it might bring. When I left it on his desk one morning with a note that simply said, "I'm proud of you, always," I expected gratitude, even a smile. Instead, I found it later tossed into the trash. My chest tightened when I saw it. I wasn't angry, not really. I was hurt. Deeply, quietly hurt. It wasn't just about the gift. It was the message behind it. He didn't want me trying. He didn't want my approval, my presence, or my effort. My love, for the first time, felt unwelcomed, unneeded. That night, I tried to speak to him again. I found him in the living room, staring at his phone, fingers scrolling rapidly. "Ryan," I began, careful. "Not now," he said sharply, eyes fixed on the screen. I felt the sting of rejection, but I stayed seated, keeping my voice steady. I don't understand what I did wrong. I thought I was trying to be here for you." He finally looked at me, eyes flashing. "You think you're helping. You think you understand. But you don't. You've never really listened." The words were calm, measured, yet they carried the full weight of disappointment. I could see it in his eyes, hurt, frustration, anger, a growing chasm between us that I didn't know how to bridge. I tried to respond, but nothing I said seemed right. I'm sorry. I don't want to hurt you." "Then stop trying to fix me," he snapped, louder than he had ever spoken before. "Stop pretending you know me." The sound of his voice bouncing off the walls of the living room made my chest ache. I wanted to shout, to beg, to pull him close, to tell him I loved him. But I didn't. I stayed quiet, letting the words settle, the silence heavier than anything else. After that night, the distance was undeniable. He stopped sharing even the small, fleeting things, homework victories, jokes, favorite shows. He retreated completely, a fortress I had no key to. Even Sarah, gentle and patient as she was, seemed at a loss, her smiles tinged with quiet worry. Weeks later, I discovered another subtle betrayal. He had borrowed money from a friend without telling me, small amounts at first, then gradually more. When I asked him about it, he denied it at first, then mumbled, almost embarrassed. I didn't scold him. I didn't raise my voice. I just felt the quiet collapse of trust, a part of my role as a father slipping away. Everywhere I turned, I saw signs that he was slipping from my reach. Notes tossed away, doors closed, whispers with friends, small lies to protect his space from me. All pieces of a puzzle I didn't yet know how to solve. And yet, through it all, I loved him. Even when it hurt. Even when he rejected me. Even when he built walls around his heart, I loved him. And somewhere, deep inside, I knew this conflict wasn't just about him. It was about me too. My mistakes, my assumptions, the ways I had thought presence equaled understanding, that providing equaled connection. Love alone was not enough. I was learning that the hard way, in real time, as my son pulled away from me. I never imagined that a single phone call could change everything. It was late in the evening, the kind of night where the house felt heavy with silence, the only sound the occasional creak of the floorboards. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my cold coffee, replaying every interaction with Ryan in my mind. And then the phone rang. It was him. Dad. His voice was hesitant, small, almost fragile. Yes, I asked, trying to keep my tone steady, though my chest felt tight. I need a place to stay, he said. That simple statement, plain as daylight, carried the weight of months of unspoken words, of distance, of pride and hurt, of all the mistakes we had made along the way. I wanted to say so much at once. I wanted to cry, to yell, to laugh, to hold him close and never let him go. But I didn't. I only said, okay, come home. When he arrived, I saw a man in the making, taller, broader, more self-contained than the boy I remembered. His hair was longer, his eyes guarded. He carried his phone and a small bag, but behind it all was something I recognized. The same boy I had loved, the same heart I had nurtured, now wounded and weary. We sat in the living room, the silence stretching between us. I offered him tea. He declined. I tried to ask about school, work, life, anything that could start a bridge, but he stayed quiet. And for the first time in months, I understood. He wasn't rejecting me out of anger. He was protecting himself. Protecting a heart that had been hurt, a trust that had been broken, a father he didn't yet know how to accept fully. That night, after he went to his room, I sat alone on the couch. The weight of the months, of the distance, of my mistakes, pressed down on me. I thought about every birthday I had missed, every soccer game I couldn't attend, every time I had assumed love alone would be enough. I realized then that it wasn't. Presence is not just being there. It's being seen, being heard, being understood. The next morning, I tried again. I went into his room gently, not wanting to frighten him with my sudden presence. Ryan, I said softly, I know I haven't done things right. I know I've failed in ways I didn't see, in ways I ignored. But I want to make it right. He looked at me, eyes guarded, and after a long pause, he whispered, I don't know if you can. The words hurt. Not because he doubted me, but because I knew they were true. I couldn't erase the past. I couldn't undo the months of silence, the misunderstandings, the subtle betrayals. I could only move forward, one careful step at a time. Over the next few days, the tension stayed, but something shifted. He started speaking in small bursts, short sentences, clipped responses, fragments of conversation that hinted at trust slowly returning. One afternoon, I found him in the living room, sketching quietly. The pencils I had once given him, tossed into the trash, were now back in his hands. He didn't say anything at first. I sat beside him, careful not to interrupt. This is good, Ryan, I said softly. Really good. He looked up briefly, just a flicker of a smile, then returned to his drawing. And in that moment, I understood something. Turning points aren't always loud, dramatic, or filled with tears and shouting. Sometimes they're quiet, almost invisible. They're the moments where a wall is chipped away by patience, love, and understanding. And yet, even as hope began to return, I knew the journey wasn't over. There would be setbacks, moments of doubt, times when the past would feel too heavy. But this was the first step, the first sign that maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild. The days that followed were quiet, cautious, as if we were both testing the waters of a fragile reconciliation. Ryan didn't open up easily, and I didn't push. Instead, I tried to meet him where he was, offering presence without pressure, small gestures without expectation. One evening, I found him sitting at the kitchen table, sketching by lamplight. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat silently across from him, letting him work without interruption. "Those lines, they're different," I said finally, nodding toward the page. He looked up, a flicker of surprise crossing his features. "Different how?" "Sharper, more deliberate," I said. "More thoughtful. You've changed." He didn't say anything at first, just returned to the page. Then, quietly, he muttered, "I guess I've been thinking a lot." I nodded, careful not to overreact. "Thinking about what?" I asked softly. He hesitated, then whispered, "About stuff. About life. About us." The words were small, almost fragile, but they carried weight. After months of silence, subtle resentments, and walls built carefully between us, he was finally speaking. And I realized in that moment that patience, quiet presence, and understanding mattered more than anything else. Later that week, I tried another small step. I suggested we cook dinner together. Nothing fancy, just pasta and salad. He didn't immediately refuse, which was already progress. We worked side by side in the kitchen, chopping vegetables, stirring sauces, laughing quietly at little mistakes. "You always do this wrong," he said, smirking as I dropped a carrot onto the floor. "I always do things wrong," I countered, pretending offense. He laughed softly, a sound I had missed more than I realized. "Yeah, every time. But it's funny." That laughter, fragile and fleeting, felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. It reminded me that beneath the hurt and rebellion, the boy I loved was still there, still capable of joy, still capable of connection. We sat down to eat, and the conversation stayed light, small, careful. No heavy talks about the past, no arguments over mistakes, just quiet companionship. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a solution. But it was a beginning. One night, as I was washing dishes and he was finishing homework at the counter, he asked something I hadn't heard in months. "Dad, do you really listen?" I paused, hand on the faucet, looking at him. "I try. I've been trying. But I know I haven't always been good at it." He nodded slowly, eyes downcast. I know. I need you to hear me, not tell me what to do." "I hear you, Ryan," I said softly. "I really do." It was the first time he had asked for my attention, without defiance, without walls, without the tension that had dominated our lives for months. And in that moment, I realized that turning points aren't dramatic or sudden. They are small, deliberate, quiet moments where two people choose to be vulnerable, choose to bridge the distance. The most powerful moment came unexpectedly. One rainy evening, the kind of rain that taps softly against windows, he knocked on my bedroom door. "Dad, can I talk to you?" he asked. "Of course," I said, my voice gentle. He sat beside me on the bed, hands fidgeting nervously. I didn't mean to push you away," he said quietly. I didn't know how to say things before. I was angry. I was hurt. And I missed having you." My throat tightened. I wanted to hug him, to tell him it was okay, that I understood, that I had felt the same distance too. I took a deep breath and said, "I missed you too, Ryan. Every day, and I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." We sat in silence for a while, letting the sound of rain fill the room. No words were needed. In that quiet, fragile moment, I understood the turning point had arrived. We had reached a place where honesty could exist, where hurt could be acknowledged, where healing could begin. Over the next few days, small changes continued. We began to share little conversations again, casual talks about school, friends, dreams. I noticed him laughing more freely, joking with Sarah at dinner, lingering in the living room instead of retreating immediately to his room. Trust, slowly, like a fragile plant, was starting to grow again. I realized then that the turning point wasn't a single event, a confrontation, or a dramatic apology. It was the accumulation of small moments, listening without judgment, offering presence without forcing connection, giving love even when it wasn't reciprocated fully. And I learned something that I will carry for the rest of my life. Sometimes, love isn't about fixing, about providing, or about guiding. Sometimes, love is about waiting, about listening, about allowing someone to find their way back to you in their own time. After that rainy night, things began to change slowly, almost imperceptibly. Ryan's laughter returned in small doses, quiet but genuine. He began sitting at the kitchen table during dinner, sharing little details about his day. A funny conversation with a friend, a new song he liked, a sketch he had been working on. I learned that reconciliation isn't immediate. It's a process, delicate and patient. You can't force it. You can't demand it. You can only be there, every day, with presence and understanding. And so I did. I showed up in the small moments. A cup of tea placed quietly beside him, a smile shared across the room, a gentle word of encouragement when he didn't expect it. One morning, I found him at his desk, staring at his notebook. He looked up and said, "Dad, can you help me figure this out?" I felt a sudden rush of warmth, the quiet triumph of a bridge rebuilt. "Of course," I said. We sat together, reviewing his work. Not as teacher and student, not as authority and child, but as two people reconnecting, side by side, finding a rhythm of understanding and mutual respect. Even Sarah noticed the change. One evening, as we sat in the living room together, she smiled at me and said, "You've been patient. You've been listening. And it's making a difference. He's opening up again." I nodded quietly. It felt good to be recognized, but the real reward was in seeing Ryan's guarded expression soften, in hearing his laughter echo through the house once more. We started small traditions again, weekend bike rides, walks in the park, quiet evenings watching movies. It wasn't the same as before, not yet. There were still moments of hesitation, subtle signs of lingering hurt. But there was progress. Slowly, steadily, the bond was growing stronger. One afternoon, Ryan handed me a sketch he had been working on. It was of our house, the backyard, the swing set. But this time, it included more than just figures of us. There were details I hadn't noticed before, a small garden in the corner, the way the sunlight fell on the porch, even the dog lying lazily in the yard. "This is incredible," I said softly. He shrugged, a small, proud smile on his face. "I wanted it to look real, like home." I felt a lump in my throat. It does. It really does. It wasn't just about the sketch. It was about him trusting me again, letting me see the world through his eyes, letting me be part of his life once more. It was about healing. As the weeks passed, Ryan and I found a rhythm again, cautious, careful, but real. He began to talk more openly, sharing his thoughts without defensiveness, asking questions, laughing freely. He even started seeking my advice, not as a lecture, but as a conversation. One evening, we sat together on the porch, the sun low and golden, the air cool. He asked me about my childhood, something he had never shown interest in before. "Did you ever feel lost?" he asked quietly. I paused, thinking carefully. "Yes," I said honestly. "Many times. I think everyone does, in some way. But feeling lost doesn't mean you're alone. You just have to find the people who are willing to walk with you." He nodded, thoughtfully. "I think I understand. Maybe that's what I needed with you." That simple acknowledgement, so small and unassuming, carried more weight than any grand gesture. It reminded me that healing isn't about sweeping declarations or dramatic reconciliations. It's about listening, understanding, and showing up every day, even when it's hard. Our evenings became filled with little rituals again. Sometimes it was cooking together, sometimes walking the dog, sometimes sitting quietly while he sketched and I read beside him. The quiet moments were no longer heavy with tension. They were comfortable, peaceful, and full of subtle love. One night, Ryan came to me with a letter he had written, not for school, not for an assignment, but for himself. He handed it to me hesitantly, eyes downcast. I wanted you to read this," he said softly. I took it, careful and reverent. His handwriting was messy, but the words were clear, apologies, reflections, and small confessions about the months we had struggled. I read it slowly, my chest tight with emotion. He had been honest, vulnerable, and brave, the very thing I had hoped for all along. After a long pause, I put the letter down and said, "Thank you, Ryan. That means more than you know. And I'm proud of you, for this, and for everything you do." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that reaches the eyes, and for the first time in a long while, I felt that our connection was genuine and mutual. Sarah noticed it too. One night, as we sat in the living room, she said quietly, "You've both grown. It's like you're discovering each other again, with understanding, not expectation." I nodded. "We are. And I finally understand something important. Love isn't about being perfect or always knowing the right words. It's about being present, being patient, and being willing to keep trying, no matter how many times you fail. Ryan overheard and added, I think I've been learning that too. That even when someone messes up, it doesn't mean they don't care. Sometimes it just means they're human. Hearing him say that, seeing his eyes soften, I realized that reconciliation wasn't just for him. It was for me too. I had been learning, growing, and understanding the depth of love, the quiet, steady kind that perseveres even when everything feels broken. We began to make small plans for the future together. Weekend trips, projects, and even discussions about his aspirations. And while the past couldn't be rewritten, the present felt real, honest, and full of possibility. Through all of this, I learned that resolution isn't about perfection or erasing mistakes. It's about acknowledgement, patience, and consistent effort. It's about showing up when it matters, even when it feels small or unseen. And most importantly, it's about letting the people you love know, every day, that they are seen, heard, and valued. Time moved quietly after that. It didn't rush, and it didn't announce itself. It simply passed, carrying small moments of connection, laughter, and understanding. Ryan and I had reached a place where the walls between us were no longer insurmountable. They still existed, at times, but they were thinner now, permeable to honesty and patience. I often found myself sitting alone in the living room late at night, thinking about the months we had lost. The anger, the distance, the subtle betrayals, they all weighed heavily in memory. And yet, I didn't feel bitterness anymore. I felt gratitude. Gratitude for the chance to rebuild, for the lessons I had learned, for the depth of love that persisted even through mistakes. One evening, Ryan came to me with a small sketchbook, his latest work. He handed it over with a quiet smile. I wanted you to see this, he said. I opened it carefully, page by page. Each drawing was more thoughtful than the last, filled with details, emotion, and care. And then I realized it wasn't just art. It was him telling me, without words, that he trusted me again, that he felt safe sharing himself, that the bond we had lost was slowly, beautifully returning. I looked at him and said softly, I'm proud of you, Ryan, not just for your talent, but for who you are and for finding your way back to me. He nodded, eyes shining faintly in the lamplight. Thanks, Dad, for waiting, for understanding. And in that moment, I understood the most important lesson of all. Love is not about grand gestures or perfect timing. It's about consistency. It's about showing up, even when it hurts, even when it's quiet, even when it feels like nothing is happening. Because sometimes the smallest acts, the patience, the listening, the presence, are what heal the deepest wounds. I reflected on my own failings as a father. The times I assumed presence was enough, the moments I tried to fix rather than listen, the silent absences that built walls between us. I could not undo them. I could not rewrite the past. But I could move forward with awareness, patience, and love. And that, I realized, was enough. We began to plan small trips, dinners, walks in the park. Nothing extravagant, nothing designed to impress. Just quiet moments together, reading, sketching, talking about life, sharing laughter. And through these simple experiences, I felt the healing deepen. The hurt remained, sometimes, like faint scars beneath the surface, but it was no longer raw. It was part of our story, a testament to survival, patience, and love. Some nights, when the house was still and the world outside quiet, I would sit by the window and watch Ryan working on his sketches or reading at the kitchen table. I would smile softly, thinking, we made it this far. We are still learning, still growing, but we are together. And I realized something else. Forgiveness, for him, for me, for the months lost, was not about erasing pain. It was about carrying it lightly, understanding it, and letting it guide you toward better connection. I had learned, finally, that love is not measured by perfection, by constant agreement, or by flawless moments. It is measured by endurance, by presence, by the willingness to understand, even when it is hard. And most of all, it is measured by hope, the quiet hope that people can change, heal, and reconnect. One night, Ryan came to my room again, holding a sketch he had drawn of the three of us, Sarah, him, and me, smiling in the backyard under a bright sun. I wanted to draw this, he said softly, to remember. I took it from him, my hands trembling slightly. I'll remember too, I whispered, every day. and I'll keep trying to be the father you need." He smiled, faint but real. And in that smile, I saw the full circle of our journey, the struggle, the distance, the mistakes, and now, the quiet redemption. Life would not be perfect. There would be more challenges ahead. But we had learned that even in the hardest moments, love could endure. Even when hope seemed fragile, connection could be rebuilt. And sometimes, the most powerful moments are the quiet ones, a shared cup of tea, a sketch, a simple conversation that remind you that love, patience, and understanding can carry you through anything. I leaned back in my chair that night, watching the rain fall softly outside, and I thought, I've learned something precious. Sometimes, the greatest love isn't loud or dramatic. It's quiet. It's patient. It's enduring. And it's worth every moment of effort, every ounce of hope, every bit of heart. And with that thought, I felt peace. Not the kind of peace that erases mistakes, but the kind that allows you to carry them gently, and still love fully, and still move forward with hope.